Welcome to season 2 of CISO Point of View. It's been a while since we ran season 1. I'm really excited to be back with a bang. So this season's topic is around ransomware. As ransomware attacks become more frequent, more costly, and even more sophisticated, having a solid ransomware remediation or ransomware protection plan is, of course, a critical component of any organization's security posture. That said, simply securing your production environment is not enough. I think we all know that. Threat actors are constantly shifting their attack strategies, often targeting storage, backup, and organizations' ability to recover their data as well. And so we're here to talk about a data-first security program. And I'm really excited to be joined by Matthew Lang, formerly CISO at State Employees Credit Union. Hey, Matthew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Before we dive straight in, Matthew, can you give us a bit of an intro to who you are and where you're from?
Absolutely. So I kind of came up through the ranks in information security. I actually started many years ago as a IT systems mainframe developer, and then became kind of an IT auditor. And then made the jump to information security, and I worked my way up from the bottom. I was a security analyst all the way up to engineer, and then became a manager, and ultimately became a CISO. Majority of my background has been financial industry, though I did do a stint at a major retail organization, and I did a stint at a manufacturing 3D printing kind of company. They were kind of cutting edge. But the majority by far has been financial industry. I also served 22 years in the U.S. Navy as an IT chief.
Amazing. Fantastic. Sounds like you've had a busy and productive career.
Yeah. I I could say I was wearing a lot of hats over those years.
Good. All right. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. All right, let's dive straight in. So I set the scene talking about ransomware. Obviously, it's not a new topic, but it is on people's minds. So let me start with this. Where do you put your efforts in defending from ransomware? What are the kind of newer areas that you think are really important nowadays in 2022, going into 2023?
No, that's a great question, and it's good to pause and think about it for a second, because you tend to want to just go with your first gut reaction. And I was like, that may not be the right way to do it. I have always before thought, focusing on disaster recovery and backup and the security around your offsite storage and systems and data was very important. But you can't do it in a vacuum. And so you have to do the cybersecurity awareness or the information security training with it, because unfortunately, I have had incidents at companies where we literally had people being social engineered is the right way to say it, but they fell for it. Whether it was a phishing attack or it was a phone call, a business email compromise, it doesn't really matter what term you use for it. They were social engineered in some way, shape, or form, and they fell for it. And I literally had one employee that was in a parking lot at a major retail chain getting cards, gift cards to give to the hacker, because they believed it was somebody at the company and it was an emergency situation. And when I finally had the conversation with the individual, I was like, what on earth were you thinking? How did you think that this was even remotely legitimate? Why would the CEO of the company be reaching out to you to begin with? They've never done it before. Why are they doing it now? And why on earth would they be so urgent to tell you to go to this retail chain when you can write, a check or do an electronic funds transfer? Why would you need to get a gift card?
Yep.
To be able to process this? That makes absolutely no sense.
And it talks to the point of education and training, not just one-off, but
Absolutely.
continuous.
Yeah. I mean, everybody, every employee wants to feel super important, right? They want to feel like what they do matters to the company. And so when they get a communication from the CEO, man, sure, it makes them feel like, they're a senior vice president all of a sudden. And so you gotta help them understand and say, you are important, but you're most likely never going to hear from the CEO. Don't be offended by that. That's just not your role. It may be your role someday, but the role you're coming into this company here now, uh, that won't entail communications from the CEO on a regular basis.
Yep. No, up until recently, I've spoken to a lot of CISOs and senior security folks, and up until recently, organizations tend to focus on prevention. Too
Mhm.
few used to take the next step and prepare for the day after. The old adage of it's not if, it's when.
Absolutely.
But obviously, I think nowadays people understand that this leaves them seriously exposed to a significant risk. So what should organizations do to guarantee recovery?
Testing. My biggest emphasis area, most recently at SECU, was I took over the disaster recovery team. When I got there, it was kind of ad hoc, the DR process and the people. And I very quickly realized if we ever get compromised, we need to be able to recover quickly and confidently that what we're recovering is what we wanted, and that the recovery data itself is not compromised, right? Because the ransomware attacks, you mentioned it just a few minutes ago. A lot of times they want to go after the data and the backups. That's exactly what they want to do. They want to compromise the data in production. They want to ensure that if you go to your recovery data, that they're being recovered and their access is still there. So they attack the recovery data or the backup tapes, whatever method you're using. So, because they want to maintain that control, they don't want you to know they're there. But if you do know they're there, they want to know they got a back door. So they attack the data and the recovery. So my biggest focus was, okay, let's make sure we have data, that it's recoverable, that it's clean data, and that the only people that have access to that data are the people that need it specifically for their job, right? So, I had a lot of IT folks that weren't happy with me when I said, you can't have access to the data. Once you give it to us, that's it. Your access is gone unless we recover. You'll have your access when we recover the data, but while it's in storage, no, you don't have access to it. If you need to update your data, which I highly recommend, okay, then you're going to work with our team and we're going to store the data that way securely and safely.
Great. And moving on, which security practices do you think have evolved? And do you think they match the current business needs, or do you think there's a way to go there?
I think it's a little bit of a combination, right? It's a little bit hybrid. So there obviously has been a tremendous push in probably the last 10 years, maybe longer, to move to cloud-based type storage and cloud-based platforms, data systems, you name it. And so there has been a big push that I would say in the last 10, 15 years to develop those security practices in the cloud. And it's really important. I don't know that it's as mature as it needs to be. I think it's come a long way. And there are certainly major players like Microsoft and Amazon that have done a great deal building out those security practices, and Google as well. Excuse me. And so those major players, they've come a long way in developing their security practices. I just don't know that it's complete enough.
Hmm. I'd imagine that, especially within the financial services industry, they're probably slower to move to the cloud than perhaps manufacturing industries, other industries. Do you think that's correct or not?
I think it depends on the company.
Mm.
There are a lot of companies that I know that and friends of mine that manufacturing, they went right to the cloud because it was just more efficient for them. And in some instances, I have seen where companies moved to the cloud, they were more secure because they had those security processes and technology as part of their cloud environment that they just didn't have in a production environment. So they actually improved their security by going to the cloud. But you're right, financial industry, very slow to adopt new technology. And so cloud-based systems at, just most recently here at SECU, when I first got there, we had very little in the cloud. And while I was there, it seemed like we were sprinting towards cloud this, cloud that, you name it. It was something we wanted to do and push towards and get it available in the cloud. Now you could say, the business might be pushing to the cloud because IT is not supporting them enough. Well, then you got to step back as the IT people and say, okay, are we really doing our job supporting the business with our IT technology? And if we're not, then we need to change what we're doing. Because they're running to the cloud because we're not supporting them. Well, that's not a good answer you want to hear or know about if you're an IT person. So it's kind of a mix hybrid in my mind that a lot of companies go with. I have yet to see a large organization that is 100% cloud-based and has nothing on-premise.
Yeah. You mentioned before about the business wanting to move to the cloud. I'm interested to know more about the management or even the boards of organizations. Do you think they take an active role in security, and specifically within the financial services sector, specifically with data security, data protection? Or do you think they stay out of it and they leave it to the IT and the security teams?
I think it varies by organizations and the board members, right? So there are some board members might be their first board they're ever sitting on, so they may not have a tremendous amount of experience, but they might have been a CIO at a company, so they might be very experienced in IT but never have sat on a board before. So I think it varies based on the maturity level of the board, the experience level of the board. But I do think boards are taking a more aggressive and active role in understanding business risk, whether it's cyber risk or IT risk or just compliance risk. I think the boards are becoming more active and more aggressive in getting a better understanding. I think 20 years ago, they didn't. They were just like, we hired you to take care of this. You just tell us what you need, right? And come tell us how you're doing, and you tell us what you need, but we're going to stay out of your way. We hired you as the expert to do it. But now, especially in the US, with certain legislation coming out, board members can now be held liable for any major breach. And so that has, I think, pushed them harder to take a more active role or be a little more engaged. Plus, CISOs have matured, right? So, excuse me, 20 years ago, the CISO role was fairly new. I think it's, excuse me, I think it's still kind of maturing. And so, a long time ago, it was hit and miss as to how mature that CISO was reporting to the board.
Yeah, I'm interested to know for those organizations that perhaps the board are not actively involved, are there specific skills that a CISO needs to make sure that security has its right place and is seen as a strategic imperative?
Oh, yes, 100% in my mind, right? So my personal opinion is to be a good CISO, I think you have to have a very strong background in information security. I think, my personal opinion again, that the best CISOs are the ones that worked actively in information security, right? They came up through the ranks and they learned the information security program and how to build a program, mature a program, how to do the actual work. But it's a double-edged sword, right? So that if a lot of information security people and IT people, they don't understand the business risks, and so they're less likely to be willing to accept a certain level of risk.
Mm.
Whereas a business person who doesn't understand IT or information security all that well, they understand management and business. And so they can speak to the board, they can speak to the executive leadership team about business risk and say, we can live with this risk. We're just going to hire, 10 people to run this new technology that'll limit our risk exposure in this particular business area. Okay, well, that's what the business wants to hear, right? Because the business needs to grow. IT, people in IT and security, they've always had this kind of mindset in the back of their head. Well, we'll just tell them no, they can't do that, right? That's not the answer that business wants to hear, certainly.
Yeah.
And two, it's not the right answer anyway. IT is there to support the business. Information security is there to support the business. If you're not supporting the business, then they don't need you. They can replace you. So you got to let go of that no mentality or that fear of any kind of risk. And you got to be willing to accept a certain level of risk. You mitigate it as best you can. You put layers of security in there, put layers of IT in businesses so that you can support the business and sustain the business long term. So long-winded answer, but my opinion is the CISO has to be able to relate business to the board and executive leadership. It's the only way he gets a budget. It's the only way he improves his budget or improves his headcount.
Yep, makes sense. All right, let's move on to the CISO lessons learned section. So looking back in your career, how did you approach data protection throughout your career? What worked, what didn't? And finally, what would you have done differently?
That's a great question. I have always been a strong protector of data. One of my early jobs was data loss prevention. And it was a new technology when it came out. And, I bought into that pretty wholeheartedly because I saw when the tool is implemented correctly and managed appropriately, it is extremely effective at reducing risk, business and corporate risks for the organization. I have literally caught employees, they weren't maliciously trying to leak data out of the company, but they didn't know, right? So perfect example is, years ago, Excel spreadsheets, and you can still do it today, I'm pretty sure. You can hide columns. Well, if you receive a spreadsheet with hidden columns and you just don't know that those columns are hidden, you're not paying attention, and you email it outside the company, well, guess what might be in those hidden columns? It could be things like PCI data or PII data or health-related data that the company doesn't want let out of the organization. And sure enough, daily I was in data loss prevention, finding occurrences of spreadsheets, PDFs, files, sometimes even code being sent out, outside the organization. It would be a code, it'd be a privacy violation or a policy violation. I have to call these people, communicate with them and say, this is being blocked. And they would usually, when it came to me, I got to the point where I was kind of a senior DLP person. I got the escalated calls that people were yelling, this has to go out. And, I said, no, it can go out, but here's what you got to do. Open up that spreadsheet, unhide those two columns, and they'd be yelling at, there is no social security data in this. I know that, I can see it. I'm like, okay, let's open it up and look at it. I said, now unhide those two columns right there. And they'd be like, oh crap. And it'd be this, I can't believe this moment. And I said, that's why this file is being blocked. And they're like, okay. And so they would just reformat it, take out that data, and then they could send it on. And so it became an education, an awareness issue, or training opportunity for the employees. So I'm a big fan of protecting data and actively training people about protecting data. Most recently as the CISO at SECU, I was a big fan of day one meeting new hires, right, and talking to them about cybersecurity and the culture at the organization and how important protecting data was. So I think it goes a long way to educate people as well as have that technology and process in place to protect data.
Great. Are there any other threats that you're concerned with that you see as emerging?
Emerging threats, there's always emerging threats. I don't know that there's any one that stands out to me. My military background, I'm always afraid of what a lot of people call nation states doing active attacks against companies. I have seen it, right? So I know it exists. I know there are countries, there are organizational groups focused on compromising companies. Whether it's in America or whether it's in Europe or any other country, it happens a lot. People don't want to believe it. They think it's scare tactics by the information security folks. It's not. It does happen. I have been at organizations that were actively attacked, or what a lot of people will call an advanced persistent threat. That's just basically somebody that's continuously trying to gain access, and they're trying different methods to gain access. For a CISO, his worst day is the day he gets compromised, right? The second worst day is the day after when he has to fix everything. And it can take weeks and months to fix it. So as a CISO, you have to get it right 100% of the time, whereas the bad guy only has to get it right once, right? And then he's in. He or she is in. And so it's a constant battle. But again, for the threat people, they can pivot constantly, right? So they try business email compromise. It doesn't work. They try user ID and passwords from previous hacks on your systems. They try social engineering. They try everything they can, even becoming a customer temporarily to gain access to see how you set up customers, so they can then compromise all your customers. Or your security posture, right? They're going to bang against your perimeter constantly, and they're going to learn your perimeter security protocols and tools in place. And then they're going to go learn about those tools and say, okay, what is its weakness? And try to compromise that. So they're constantly attacking. And if you think you're not the target of an attack, then you're probably not aware of the threats out there well enough to understand that almost every company is the target of an attack, some level of attack.
Yeah. One final question, Matthew, is some advice to other CISOs or budding CISOs. Where should they start, or what should they do to take a risk-based approach to data protection and security posture management in general?
No, that's a great question. So my experience at larger companies, there's usually a chief risk officer or CRO. Make friends with that individual if there is one. If there isn't one, then you need to start a cyber risk committee, right? And you need to be on that committee, and you need to get other executives on that committee and start educating all the leadership about risk and why you're making a risk-based decision. And tell them up front, look, I'm not going to be the person that says no every time, but I might say no to that particular way of doing it, but we can do it this way, right? And give them an alternative to whatever the project is they're trying to roll out, or product or software or enhancement, whatever it is. You have to enable them, and you have to come to them from a standpoint of, I'm here to help you and enable you to succeed, because I don't succeed if you don't succeed. The company has to prevail. The company has to grow to become and be profitable. So you have to come to the picture from that standpoint. Budding CISOs, I would say, if you're coming up through the ranks, you better learn the business, and you need to learn the business from a business mindset, not from a cyber, not from an IT standpoint. You need to actively get involved with other CISOs and leaderships and understand what data do they present to the board? What data do they present to executive leadership? Because that story that you have to tell at that executive level and the board level is extremely important. You can't succeed as a CISO on your own. You have to build relationships with all of the executive leadership. My personal opinion, the second best friend other than the chief risk officer for the CISO is if the company's large enough, the COO, chief operating officer, because those three people, they can do a lot to enable a company to grow at an exponential growth rate. And when those three people work well together, I've just seen companies do really well, in my personal opinion. If there's no COO, then it may be time for the CISO and the chief risk officer to report to the CEO and communicate with him, right? Because you have to be involved in strategy decisions that get made. Because if you're not, then you're already behind the curve as far as securing whatever that new idea, whatever that new business strategy is. You don't want to be behind the curve. You want to be out in front of it so that you can enable the business, plain and simple. Because if you have to tell them, whoa, we got to slow down this new product rollout by 30 days because I need time to figure out how we're going to protect it. That's the last thing a COO wants to hear, right? So, yeah,
great advice, great tips for other CISOs. Matthew, it's been amazing. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you joining us and spending your time with us today.
Absolutely. I appreciate the time to talk with you.